Have you ever tried to connect with a text that's, 1,400 years old? It can feel like there's a huge gap. Well, today we're going to dive into a really powerful idea from the scholar Sayyid Qutb about how to read the Quran. His whole point is that it's not just about understanding the words on the page, it's about completely changing our approach, seeing it less as a dusty historical document and more as a living, breathing guide for our lives, right here, right now.
So Qutb kicks things off with this really striking image, a vast chasm. He's talking about that feeling of distance, that disconnect so many of us can feel when we pick up an ancient text. That sense that a book from the 7th century just can't possibly speak to all the complexities of our modern world. And Qutb doesn't hide from that feeling. He puts it right up front.
All right, so that's the big question, right? How do we actually bridge that chasm? How can a text that's so deeply rooted in a specific time and place feel like it's speaking directly to us today? That's the challenge we're going to unpack.
Qutb's solution, and it's a big one, requires a total shift in perspective. He says we have to stop seeing the Quran as just a collection of beautiful, kind of abstract verses. Instead, we need to see it for what it was always meant to be. An active force, a guide that was designed to get right into the messiness and challenges of real life.
So let's break this down. On one hand, you've got what he calls the abstract hymns approach. This is where you treat the text like a museum piece. It's beautiful, sure, but it's disconnected from your daily grind. And according to Qutb, that's what creates the chasm. But on the other hand is the living guide approach. This is where you see it as a book for a real, living community, meant to interact with actual human life. And that, he argues, is where all the power is.
And here's the key thing to get. The Quran wasn't revealed in some kind of vacuum. It was a real-time, dynamic conversation with its very first community. It was addressing their fears, their questions, their wins, and their losses, what Qutb perfectly calls their downright humanity. And because it was engaged with real people in real situations, the lessons inside it are absolutely timeless.
Okay, that all sounds great in theory. But what does this living interpretation actually look like when you're reading? How does it really change how you understand a specific passage? Let's ditch the abstract stuff for a minute and look at a real, concrete example. So we're going to dive into the story of Zechariah from the 3rd chapter of the Quran, Al-Imran. Now, this isn't just some random tale. For Qutb, it's the perfect case study for seeing exactly how this text comes alive.
Okay, so picture this. It starts with Zechariah, an old man praying for a child. I mean, that's a deeply human desire. Then boom, angels deliver this incredible news. But check out his reaction. It's not some kind of blind, instant faith. It's pure human logic. He asks, "Lord, how can this be? By every law of nature he's ever known, it's totally impossible." And that very human question is what sets the stage for the divine answer.
All right, this is the big moment. This is the climax of the story. And according to Qutb, this is where it all clicks. The story itself becomes a way to understand a much, much bigger idea, the very nature of God's will. And here it is, the core message. The answer he gets isn't a scientific explanation or some complicated breakdown. It's a simple, unbelievably profound statement that just reframes everything. Human limits, like age and biology, are suddenly shown to be completely irrelevant. The only thing that matters? Divine will. Qutb has a name for this idea, absolute will. And what that basically means is that all the things we see as the fixed laws of the universe, well, they're only fixed from our tiny, limited point of view. For God, they're not restrictions at all. And this principle, that God does what he wills, becomes this amazing lens for understanding not just this one story, but so many others in the Quran.
And what's really cool is, once you see this theme, you start noticing it everywhere in this chapter. It's not a one-off thing. It shows up again with Mary's devotion, the virgin birth of Jesus, and even with Jesus speaking from his cradle. Each story is like another piece of evidence, another sign pointing back to that central truth of God's unrestricted will.
Okay, so let's circle back. Remember that vast chasm we started with? How does digging into one story about one prophet actually help us bridge that gap for ourselves today? Well, here's the light bulb moment. When we read the story of Zechariah not just as a historical account of a cool miracle, but as a living demonstration of God's absolute will, the message becomes totally timeless. The idea that God's power isn't restricted by our reality applies to our lives today just as much as it did 1,400 years ago. The story transforms from a dusty record into a living lesson.
Qutb uses this amazing analogy to really hammer the point home. He calls the universe God's visual book and the Quran God's recited book. Then he asks this brilliant question: would we ever call the sun outdated? Of course not. It's a constant, active force in our world. And in that exact same way, he argues, the Quran is meant to be a perpetually active force in our lives.
So we're left with this final thought. When you look at it this way, the goal isn't just to read about the past. It's to actually enter into a living conversation with a text that's meant to speak across the centuries. So what changes for us, for you, when we stop treating ancient wisdom like it's behind glass in a museum and start seeing it as an open and ongoing dialogue?